no one wants to be a part of the club, but once you are, there is so much support that's out there because so many other people have went through it. So, be open to telling your story, and even if you're not comfortable telling it publicly, share it with one or two others, and you will be so surprised at how much support you get back. And if you're a couple that's going through it, make sure you're talking to each other and that you realize that your journey is going to be tough, but you'll get through it together. My name is Vojas Taylor. I feel so incredibly blessed and grateful for my two sons who would not be here but for Fertility Centers of Illinois. I did not meet my husband until I was a little bit later in life. I went to college, I went to law school, and just didn't really find my footing in my place and my career until later in life. And so my husband and I met through work when I was 29, and I didn't get married until I was 34. Never before that had I really ever paid that much attention to my menstrual cycles, but as soon as you decide that you're gonna try to have kids, it's the only thing that you think of. And so after we got married, we immediately started to try to have kids. And I couldn't use any of the products on the market. I couldn't figure out the ovulation predictor kits. I couldn't use any of the fancy wearable watches because my cycle was too short. And I just didn't know that it was abnormal. So after about 9 months of trying to have kids and not being successful, within that I had turned 35, really realized that something was wrong and it wasn't right, and that this was gonna be difficult for me to have kids. And so I reached out to a friend of mine who I had known did IVF, and she actually had been a patient here at FCI. And so when I knew I needed to, she was like, you need to go here. They are absolutely amazing. And so I very vividly remember still making that appointment. I was so nervous to call. No one wants to have problems having kids. And you have a little bit of embarrassment on it. And so I did. I picked up the phone and I called and I made my initial appointment here with FCI. The waiting in between the call and the appointment was still very nerve-wracking because you're waiting, and that's hard when you want to have a baby. And but it was wonderful, and everybody here was so nice. I did not need to be nervous or embarrassed, and so that's how I got to FCI. First off, it is a team. Going through a reproductive endocrinologist and going through fertility treatment, you really do have a team. From the phlebotomist to your nurse to your doctor to the receptionist, you get to know everybody. But everybody was so kind and patient and supportive, and I really did just like how they approached it as a team sport. I ask a lot of questions, and everyone always took the time to answer them. Everybody at FCI was so supportive the entire time. Support, and I was really blessed to have a lot of support from everyone, and especially my husband. I talk about this a lot, that as much as it's my journey, it was his journey as well. And I found out through testing that I had diminished ovarian reserve, which meant I have less eggs and a decreased chance of pregnancy. We opted to do IUI before we thought about going to IVF. We were very lucky that on our first IUI, we actually got pregnant. And I'll never forget getting that positive pregnancy test thinking, oh wow, this infertility thing wasn't all that bad. However, we found out a few weeks later that it was not a viable pregnancy, and so we ultimately miscarried. And that was really hard because you had this moment of there's so much beyond just that positive pregnancy test. After our miscarriage, we did 2 additional IUIs that ultimately were unsuccessful. And then we started prepping for IVF. We started our first cycle of IVF. And during the monitoring, we realized that we weren't going to get the results that we had thought we were going to get. We knew we weren't going to get a lot of eggs because of my diminished ovarian reserve, but it was even worse than what we had thought. And because we were out of pocket, proceeding meant spending a lot of money that we didn't think would ultimately result in a baby. So my husband and I, who is just so amazing and supportive, had to really come to a hard decision on what to do with that cycle. And we ultimately decided to cancel it. So we turned it into another IUI and then proceeded forward and tried a new protocol. Dr. Hirschfeld through the whole thing was so amazing and so supportive and very open and honest with us on the process. Again, we knew I wasn't going to have a typical response because of my low ovarian reserve, and she really was so fantastic and also thinking outside of the box on protocols for us that would yield a better response. So on our second IVF cycle, we did ultimately end up having 2 embryos that we were able to do a fresh transfer on. When you go through infertility, you don't really get to enjoy your pregnancy because you still always feel like the other foot is gonna drop. So, we didn't do a registry until a lot later. We didn't buy that first big purchase for the baby until, way later in our pregnancy. And then COVID hit in the middle of our pregnancy, so all of the other things that maybe we would have done, maternity pictures, just didn't become possible. But we were really lucky and overjoyed to welcome our son Maxwell on May 12th, 2020. And about 2 days into it, I looked at my husband and said, "Oh my goodness, could you imagine if we had twins?" It was so hard with one, I couldn't have imagined it with 2. And I feel so grateful and so blessed for our journey because I just am so in love with our son. And then after we had Maxwell, we knew that it was going to be, if we were going to try to have another biological child, it was going to have to be really quick. So about 6 months after we had Max, we called Fertility Centers of Illinois again to try again. And we thought we'd do IVF and have another baby. But I hadn't stopped breastfeeding long enough to actually even start the IVF testing. And so our doctor encouraged us to try in the interim. And we were blown away and had our Christmas miracle when we found out we were pregnant with our youngest spontaneously. And so Oliver Charles Taylor was born on May 8th, 2021. Everything. I'm gonna cry. My children, there is nothing that is more important to me and more rewarding than being a mom. I love every minute of it, from the midnight wake-ups to the early morning sickness boo-boos, the crying. I love the hugs, the kisses, but just overall knowing that I'm helping to contribute to the next generation and hopefully passing on nothing but positive views of life and of just pure joy. find support. It is not a journey to be walked alone, whether that's a friend, whether that's someone that you never met that you meet on an online forum or in a fertility yoga class. Finding support is the most important thing through the entire journey, because it is hard, it is emotional, and it's long. Just to have a baby, it's a long time, but you measure every moment you're going through it, and it seems longer than it is. And so having people to talk to is the most important piece.